Now, our next speaker will join us virtually. Greg Phil has over 20 years' experience in safety and environmental management, performance and assurance across road, rail and maritime transport sectors. This is primarily from a regulatory standpoint, where Greg has developed public safety policy, he's drafted safety legislation and provided safety education. What he's going to do this morning is discuss safety strategies and how to reduce risk in his presentation, which is called Heavy Vehicle Safety, Vulnerable Road Users. Now, following his presentation, we'll further discuss some key issues together. So again, I have lots of questions. Don't let me dominate. If you have questions, please send them in via the stage chat, and welcome virtually through the interwebs to Greg. G'day, Greg.
Hi, Helen. Thanks for having me on today. And hard acts to follow there with our good friend Inspector Phil Brooks and Lisa. Great presentations. And hopefully I'm not going to parrot too much of the same information when I talk to you all today. It's a slightly different perspective that I want to bring to the forum today, looking at something a bit higher level, but also talking about new technologies that are coming in. I think Lisa provided a flavour of those as well. But I suppose I really want to get up in the helicopter to see, as an industry, how do we look at mitigating some of these key risks, fatalities, terrible injuries, particularly to vulnerable road users. I'll just kick off just very quickly. I just want to give you a super quick snapshot of who we are. I know already there's been some stuff around crash trends and causal factors. I want to really hone in on some of those for you, just as a bit of an overview around vulnerable road users that we see. And a real particular focus today, I want to talk to you about vehicle design controls that can or could be put in place, and other risk mitigation strategies. And with Helen, be put under the hot seat. All right. So just quickly, I'm going to say that as a heavy vehicle regulator, that safety is our #1 priority. In doing that, and you've heard lots of stories already today, some of them not so great, around there's a balance in our heavy vehicle industry between safety and productivity, not to mention sustainability of the roads that we drive on. So things around mass, and the size and height and width, those types of things of vehicles that we use every day. So it's a balance for the industry. It's a balance for us as a regulator to make sure we take as much as possible, a pragmatic approach, but there's no two ways about it. The safety of drivers, both in the truck and out of the truck, and other road users, the community, that's the focus of the legislation. That's the core focus that underpins everything we do here. You will probably see, and just very quickly, that the NHVR regulates heavy vehicles in all of the eastern and southern states, with Western Australia and Northern Territory yet to come under the heavy vehicle national law. But we have excellent relationships with them, and our goal in the long term is for it to be one unified heavy vehicle national law right across the country. And you'll see there's again that focus and balance between safety and productivity that's always at the forefront, being pushed across our very large industry. So I want to give you a bit of a snapshot. I'm not sure really this came out beforehand, but this gives you an idea sometimes of the real the breadth of our industry and what we need to look after. So you might see the figures up there in front of you: 450,000 trucks, another 100,000 buses. Really important just to quickly reflect on that 75% of all of our trucks are heavy rigid. So you'll see in that photo down the bottom, if you can see it very well, is around the those trucks that we primarily see more in those built-up urban environments. The articulated trucks, they're not they're not animals of the forest that only live in one area or the other. Articulated trucks primarily, the majority of, by volume, operate longer haul, faster speeds, That doesn't mean that they're not in urban and built-up environments, but that's the general rule of thumb, and I'll show you some statistics shortly. On average, you'll see that from those next few figures, there's around a 2% increase in the number of trucks that are on the road every year. They're not reducing the numbers. So across articulateds, buses, heavy rigids, there's also around about a 2% increase in the number of kilometres that are travelled every year by heavy vehicles, and the Bureau of Infrastructure and Transport, they also predict that there's about a 2% growth in those road freight volumes, billion tonne kilometres for us safety nerds, and transport nerds. And so it's not a reducing impact, it's an increasing one that we have to deal with. National crash trends. I've just focused here on, and I know some of these have come up, and our figures differ slightly. I know Lisa put some up before. These are just a point in time, but the figures are around about the same. But it's important to show, of those 170, I think Lisa said around 180 that are heavy vehicle related out of fatalities that are relate to heavy vehicles, sorry. 100 of those relate to those articulateds. The good news, if there's any good news around fatalities, is that over the last 10 years, there's been about a 4% reduction in that. Unfortunately, not so for rigid trucks and buses. Those ones, again, that their primary place of work by volume is around those urban environments where there are generally a lot of traffic, a lot of people, a lot of pedestrians, those types of things. And you'll see for rigids and buses there, you know, there's been little change over the last 10 years. It's quite static as an overall trend. I'm not sure how well you can see these stats here. My apologies. But look, the headline is that so this blue line here on this first graph is that you know, for pedestrians up until about 2016, and as in an industry going quite well, you know, where a range of about 30 fatalities a year back in the early tens. Down to around 15 per year, but it has remained relatively static since 2015, 16, excuse me. For cyclists, it's virtually remained unchanged. Regrettably, it's between 5 and 10 cyclists a year. This is just heavy vehicle related only. There are other vulnerable road users underneath that term, VRU, but we're focusing on cyclists and pedestrians today. And again, they each have their different focus areas, but you'll see the larger numbers are in the heavy rigid trucks there, particularly for pedestrians. It's going up probably since 2015, which is not a good sign. If you map things around, again, those the large projects that are happening in Australia, very large infrastructure projects, transport projects, it just goes to show that it's those higher volumes that don't assist this this overall fatality and injury rates. So vehicle designs, I don't want to labour too much on this. Sometimes I'm preaching to the converted about an industry that often understands and knows some of the issues and I suppose the safety technologies that are available. It all comes down for many operators. It comes down to cost benefit in their mind about can they put it on? How much will it cost? Do I need to get a new truck? Do I need to retrofit something that I'm not going to get my money back on, versus keeping my driver safe, versus keeping others around you safe? I'm not saying that's a good discussion to have or a good thought process, but I know that is the one that happens in our industry. Just on the left there, you'll see that again, it's going that risk environment where it's more prevalent in those metropolitan and urban areas. The risk is generally lower in rural areas. That's only because of the heavily reduced frequency from a risk profile that a crash could occur. A good document that I will point all industry players to is the NHVR's called Vehicle Setup. It's a vehicle technology uptake plan that was released last year. And from that, a range of pieces of work that the NHVR is leading with other research institutes, other industry bodies and associations to look at how particularly different sectors can increase the uptake of safety technologies. So that's through education, guides, fleet purchasing guides, and also where we can, doing our bit to try and reduce regulatory barriers. Like other regulators, the NHVR doesn't set the laws; it doesn't put them in place. That's for other bodies to do. We have to make sure that industry is aligning to them, but within the framework, within the flexibility that we have as a regulator, we'd like to have more. We can also make adjustments, look at our focus, where we need to target our activities, look at some of the notices and exemptions and other elements that we might do, as well as working with industry on trials and things about really promotion of particularly, I would say, I'm a big fan of technology uptake. You'll see why in a little bit down in my slide presentation, a little bit further along. A big mantra, I think, that I see here as a regulator and but particularly overseas, you'll see it in London and other cities, it's been mentioned already, is improving visibility. So for vulnerable road users, for the truck driver to be able to see them in day-to-day business. And so there's a number of areas here. So things called direct vision. It's a philosophy and process. So it's now mandatory in London vehicles, Greater London. And so that's in London, it's required there where vehicles working in and around the cities. So, majority of those are construction sites and other areas over a certain size. You should have key features. It's not mandatory over there to have all of these, but things like, lower entry floors, additional windows to the lower part of the doors, larger windscreens. You'll see the points there, shorter, more sloped bonnets and the cab over design. So it increases visibility for the driver of vulnerable road users. So if you can't see them there, so those are the direct ones, and you'll see a picture of an old, I think it's Kenworth there, in front of us, where it's had retrofitted some of the things that could be put in place. You'll see some. You might be able to see some the small windows placed in the door there. It's amazing if you ask any truck driver about do they make a difference when they're working in those urban and busy urban environments around building sites, etc., working around the cities where these are happening. They will testify as to what significant difference they do make. There's also a range of, we'd call them indirect visions, and that's things where there's a range of, they come new in a number of vehicles, but they're also things that you can retrofit. So class 4, 5 and 6 mirrors. I'll tell you, we can get more information about these if you need to, but basically those are ones like blind spot mirrors. They're ones that are at the top of the cab, further down the bottom of the cab, at the side, rather than just those standard, you'd say the mirrors that you see at the side of a typical truck. There are other ones you can add there. There's also things you might be able to see in the photo there, that there's a little in-screen, actually looks like a mirror, but it's actually connected to quite small cameras, which are situated outside the vehicle, which gives the driver this appearance that he's looking in the side mirror. But it shows it's a much better view, much better field of view, and the screen split in two. There are other things as well, such as obviously, warning stickers for people that are near vehicles, or there's a side underrun. These are things, I suppose, we'll talk about side underrun protection in a minute, but it's really to help minimise fatalities and serious injuries once a crash occurs. I want us to focus on today about trying to, actually mitigate that crash occurring in the first place. There are other things around proximity sensors. that you can have fitted to trucks, audible alerts for vulnerable road users that might be around vehicles. So when they're turning, obviously, we've all heard a reversing vehicle, that annoying buzzer. I don't know how many lives that would have saved over the years. So there are audible alerts for turning that are quite relevant, that you can switch on, particularly for around some of those slower areas where there's more pedestrians within your vicinity. As well, some vehicle operators might say, look, to put a camera on the side, or extra mirrors or something like that, my vehicles would make it too wide. And so there are options available to come to the heavy vehicle regulator to apply for exemptions. You'll see some of the other technologies around there. So inbuilt cameras. I suppose it's some of those other areas I think it's worth talking about the performance of vehicles that are out there. So particularly look at the path. So we call it swept path in the industry. And, a truck is fine when it drives out of the factory, but if you put a load or, something like a long pole or something on the back of it, you add an extra trailer on, the path at the back of it instantly becomes wider. That often changes the characteristics of the truck with respect to it can knock over someone at the back. And it's much tougher for truck drivers to control that. It's another variable that you put into to the mix. Some vehicles, there's no two ways about it, and Phil Brooks would tell you this and attest to this. There's some vehicles that are not meant to be in those environments. They're not good at turning tight circles. Their turn path and those sorts of things are quite wide, and we see this with older vehicles that are not really fit for purpose, particularly some of the older rigid trucks. Regrettably, those make it, it's even harder. You just, again, throw those more variables in the mix. You'll see there that also there's a whole range of passive and active alert systems that vehicles can come fitted standard today. Or they can be added. In some cases, they can be added. I have a lengthy list here. If I just call out a few of those, Helen. So you're talking about electronic braking systems, anti-lock braking, but also the autonomous emergency braking. Much more common, and you can fit them to vehicles. They were extremely expensive. They're not cheap, but those are coming fitted as standard in a lot more vehicles. Forward collision alerts and the normal lane departure warnings, blind spot monitoring, those types of things. And there's other things around, I suppose you should not rule out things which are giving clear warnings to pedestrians and bicyclists, cyclists as well. About warning markers on vehicles and around them. Too often we see a construction truck, it's covered in dirt, it's covered in mud, splattered stuff. It's a great big grey sludge, and it just blends into the rest of the construction site in and around a city or a suburb or something like that. You want things to alert people, just like we have bright signs that alert us to when we're turning off into a road or danger ahead when we're in our car. We advocate for vehicles, particularly around those high risk areas to have same. And obviously, looking forward, we want to do more about driver engagement and education, but one of the first pieces of material that we're developing out of that setup program is looking at areas, education, some of the materials that were provided here as a guide to purchasing new vehicles, and particularly for sectors that include like the aggregate, concrete, construction sector, and where it works in amongst those, those vulnerable road users. Unfortunately, it's not for older trucks and where you can retrofit a lot of stuff. There's a lot of material out there about that, but this is particularly about purchasing new vehicles and the things which you can, at the source, try and reduce that risk profile. So the last component that I'll have here is about please lean on your safety management system. If you don't have one, you need a safety management system in place. It's going to help keep you happy and out of the courts. It's going to help keep you reducing the safety risks that are apparent in your business. Now, whether you're a truck driver, a truck owner, you're a construction company, whatever you have, if you don't have this in place, it's important that you do. There's so much information about there. Safe Work, NHVR has a range of safety management system tools and guidance and materials, particularly targeted for our industry. But it's important, if you don't already, you have to identify and prioritize vulnerable road user risks as part of what you do every day. This industry cannot say, well, it's someone else's issue. You know, it's something else that happens. You must include that. Include your drivers in your risk management process. What are the risk controls that you have in place? And then from that, what training is required, education, comms, how often? You've got to really stick to that. You can't just say, oh, well, they'll just have to look out for themselves. You just can't do it. That's not the way it will work. You won't reduce fatalities in that way. You really need the industry at work sites, our drivers, our packers, our loaders, etc. The industry really needs to encourage them to report near misses and hazards and incidents to management. It's only through near misses and looking at these hazards that you can actually cut off something worse a bit earlier. And that's looking at, you know, you start to investigate and look at those and put in amended risk controls to help mitigate that risk before it becomes a fatality or serious injuries. And of course, I'll say continually monitor the effectiveness of those controls. You need to check in. The trick is reduce your overall risk profile, then you're going to reduce those serious incidents. The final thing I'll say in the presentation is that please consider who your third parties are, and you need to work with them. New chain of responsibility legislation came in 2018 for heavy vehicles. It's been in workplace health and safety for years and years and years. It's in all of the other sectors, maritime and rail, etc. So, and that's all about a shared responsibility for risk. So if you're a construction company, you're a transport provider, you're a driver, whatever it might be, it's important that you know who they are. You have contracts with them usually, but drivers, sometimes they're one step removed. Really try and understand what their contribution to your risk profile is. You need to share your safety management system outputs. So what are your work procedures around getting in and out of a site, backing up, telling drivers how to load vehicles, those sorts of things. And the same for work sites. You need to share those processes and incidents and reports and where the risk controls are. And that challenges each party in that chain of responsibility to consider, say, oh, what's my contribution to this? Particularly, so a good exercise is, as we often recommend, is if you're a transport operator and you're being loaded by a third party, take your procedure for a loaded truck that's safe and give it to that third party. Put in there what you believe their responsibility is. They'll very quickly tell you whether that's right or wrong. You're instantly starting to discuss that shared responsibility for risk. And that goal is of a collaborative risk approach. And this is particularly so when you have other vulnerable road users working around sites or vehicles. That's important to make sure that there's I suppose a cooperative approach to mitigating those. It can't be all just on a driver. Drivers and Lisa talked this about before. Drivers they're not saints. They're sinners in a number of instances, but they are not the cause of every single fatality between a heavy vehicle and a pedestrian or a cyclist. The National Heavy Vehicle Insurer, NTI, they believe up to 70 to 80% of all fatalities involving heavy vehicles are the fault of a third party. Now, I'm not saying that this is the case for pedestrians and cyclists that are killed in these situations, but what it is it's a joint approach to this. Everyone needs to be involved. If there's education involved, that's also to to pedestrians and cyclists, or barriers that need to be put up. If there's other elements need to put in, everyone needs to be involved in that process. My last piece of advice is be really active in your third party's safety management system space. If you're involved in third parties that are delivering stuff or taking stuff away from a site, if you're one of those drivers, if you're one of those operators driving through that space, if you're filling up with aggregate, if you're driving in and out, be involved and understand with site safety meetings, safety committees, risk control processes. It's very important, and that's the way that you will help mitigate things from a systemic perspective. And that's it from me today. A bit of a different view. I didn't want to go into specifics and put up too many horror stories, but a bit of a different viewpoint with the short time that's allowed today.
Thanks so much, Greg. Thanks. That dovetailed really well with the other two presentations we've had this morning. You finished there, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. You finished there on the question of third-party responsibility and involvement and collaboration and so far. And we know that your organisation regulates trucks, regulates their drivers. Do you, as a regulator, have any way to influence the behaviour of other road users around the heavy vehicles?
We can, I think, so that's a yes, Helen, albeit not in a legislative way. And I'll just very quickly relate to, so my time in the national rail safety space, where apart from the regrettable self-harm incidents that occur these days and have been for some time, the greatest number of fatalities in rail is around level crossings, and it's 95% of the time it's the causal factor are third parties. So as a regulator or an industry, that industry faced an issue of saying, well, how are we going to reduce these? They're not part of our legislation. They're not our customers. They're nothing like this. What do we do? It really, for us, as a regulator, we are changing our tack and saying, well, look, we have to take a responsibility. We can't throw people in jail for it, for doing the wrong thing. But what we can do is look at education and processes, try and partnership with the community, and our partnerships approach. And I know under the National Road Safety Strategy, the federal one that's just finished our consultation, they have a real social model approach. And that's, we're trying to embrace this partnerships approach about collaborating with as many different parties as we can to try and put messages across, encourage, look at alternatives, but not regrettably, but we don't have many, if any, regulatory levers to enact that.
Yeah. Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. Really interesting looking at the sorts of things you're talking about, the direct vision adjustments to vehicles, the indirect vision on the side mirrors, really fascinating, as well as the warning systems and the sorts of technological changes that can be made, as well as the cultural piece there. So thanks very much, Greg, for joining us today. We do appreciate it.